to Leading the Way podcast, where you'll learn neuroscience-backed ways to lead more effectively and have more fun at work with what you already have. Hey there, it's Chris from Leading the Way, and so excited to have you with us today. And I have a phenomenal guest today. So excited to talk with him more and let you hear from him. John, thank you so much for being on Leading the Way today.
Chris, man, it's such an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me on to explore these topics with your amazing audience.
Oh, 100%. And so, John, I'm going to tell people about you because they don't know how great you are yet, but they will in a moment. So, John Miles, he's a dynamic leader behind the globally renowned podcast Passion Struck. It's got over 45 million downloads, probably more than that at this point, and a national radio show. He inspires millions as this pivotal voice in alternative health and leadership. John's a former U.S. Navy officer. Again, thank you so much for your service. A Fortune 50 senior executive, Fortune 50, not 500. He's made significant impact as a transformative leader, specializing in intentional behavior change, and personal mastery, maybe international as well. He's an award-winning author, entrepreneur, celebrated podcast host, and he's got great insights and guidance that he's seen as a visionary in this space. So we're very lucky and excited to have him on the show. Last but not least, he's the author of a book that's somewhat new called Passion Struck, 12 Powerful Principles to Unlock Your Purpose and Ignite Your Most Intentional Life. John, again, so glad to have you on the show. And I'm just curious, what motivated you to put this book together and get it out there? You've enjoyed and worked hard to create a lot of success. You must have some reason to put this book out there in the world.
Chris, thanks for that question. And I think we are best positioned to serve the person that we once were. And I found myself, you talked about all those accolades, and I found myself in the midst of it, especially as I was moving from Lowe's Home Improvement to becoming a C-level at Dell, at a point where my career from the outside looked like it was on the top. On the inside, I was feeling a completely different reality. I had entered what Henry David Thoreau has termed quiet desperation in my own life. And I think a lot of us find ourselves in this place. In fact, I think it's something that is impacting billions of people across the globe. And what it leads to, and what happened to me, is I found myself feeling completely apathetic. And this profound emptiness just saturated every part of my being. And what it amounted to was this just feeling of numbness where it's almost even hard to describe as I look back upon it, but it was as if nothing mattered. I didn't feel at that point that anything I was doing mattered. And I certainly didn't feel like I was doing anything of significance. And people might be listening to this thinking, well, man, you're in these big companies. Sounds like you're doing a ton of things.
Right.
Well, I think what we all fall into is this position in self-discrepancy theory that they call your ought self, which is you end up in life where you think you should be doing things you should be doing based on all the expectations that have hit you throughout your life, some formed in childhood and others along the way by society, instead of pursuing your ideal life. And it's that gap that I found myself in at that point in time that eventually led to writing the book, which is all about how do you climb out of that gap.
Nice.
I mean, it's more than that. I mean, that's a big part of it, but it's also someone who could be a high achiever, but they feel stagnated. How do you level up? Or it could be a young adult who might be listening to this, who's trying to approach their life in an intentional way. How do they go about doing it? So the book and now the podcast really are about how do you close that chasm between being stuck and, kind of being passion stuck to becoming passion struck.
Love it. That's so important. And I was smiling a little bit as you're talking about the shoulds. I had a coach once tell me, "Hey, Chris, you've should all over yourself, right? We should do this, you should do that." And joking aside, we can end up feeling really stuck in someone else's definition of what success is and what happiness is and what fulfillment looks like. I think you said it so well too. In the corporate world, a lot of us, for lack of a better word, will sometimes check out, right? We'll kind of go with the corporate norms and just glide and then wonder why we're empty. So I'm so excited you've shared your journey and your expertise around this because I think it's going to help so many people and probably already has. I'm curious from your perspective, are there things leaders can do to create that space for folks so this thing doesn't happen, right? That this
Yeah.
pattern of feeling empty and passion stuck, as you said.
Yeah, I happened to be talking to Gary Vaynerchuk the other day, and he and I were talking about this very topic. He installed in his organization the first chief heart officer that I'd ever heard of, Claude Silver. And Claude herself is pretty remarkable because she has this whole theme of emotional optimism.
Mm,
But what Gary and I started to discuss, and I've seen it pretty much in every company I've been in, regardless of what size they are, is we tend to view a person at work in such a myopic way and microscopic way. And I
mm,
can't tell you how many times I've even worked with someone and you kind of see them in the role that they're performing, not in what's defined them professionally, but more importantly, we don't even consider what are their bigger aspirations in life, what are their ambitions that they want both professionally and personally. And I think that's a huge disconnect. And so, what he was trying to do with this role was he was trying to understand the heart of his employees and he was trying to look at them in a way by not calling it HR, but chief heart officer, that they started to take an interest in a person's totality. And
mm.
I think this is really important because I personally, as more jobs are going to be displaced because of AI, automation, et cetera, I think we have an issue that's only going to get more profound, meaning more and more companies are going to look at us as numbers, not as human beings, which is why so many people feel disengaged at work and unfulfilled.
Sure.
And to me, I think as more and more people start becoming individual entrepreneurs, going back in time to when there were more people who were like that in the world, when whether they were farmers or blacksmiths, what have you, I think we're going to reach that state again, and companies are going to have to wake up to it to this. It's almost like going from a selling market to a buyer's market for homes.
Mm,
I think we've gone through 50, 60 years. You can see it in the numbers where people have moved away from entrepreneurship towards larger companies. And I think it's the pendulum's going to swing. So as companies see that swing, it's going to be harder and harder for them to retain employees. So now is a perfect time to start focusing on this broader aspect. Long
right.
answer to your question, but hopefully that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. I think it's really helpful and it's interesting too. I'm curious. I can see a path for a solopreneur, an entrepreneur to start something new and really live in their passion. But it'd be challenging to do that maybe in their existing 9 to 5, or they think it's challenging, right? Maybe they've got some beliefs that aren't totally accurate. Do you have thoughts on, versus going on your own versus trying to do it within the confines of your company? Do you have feelings one way or the other on that?
I think every single person is different when it comes to this. Personally, I tried to do that. I was working as a partner in a private equity firm, and at the time, trying to lead various companies that they put me in charge of.
Mm.
And I was doing this through a side company that I had created called Ovesto, where I was one of the very first companies doing fractional CXO type of placements.
Oh,
And
sure.
what I found is, although I was trying to start getting into this side gig, so much of my time was being consumed by it that I didn't have time to do the work in the companies and to lead this company and to work on myself.
Mm.
And so in my case, what I eventually found was that I just had to trust in the process and take the leap and not have to have that safety net. Now, that's the
Right.
most risky thing that you can do. But for me, I really needed to push myself there because I kept falling back on areas that I was making money, et cetera. Now, for another person, they might be able to do both simultaneously. And of course, that's a better glide path than
Sure.
when I did. But to me, the most important thing that I had to do was get back in touch with my inner self. And that took time and separation from all the distractions in my life in order to do it.
Yeah. No, it totally makes sense. And I've talked to others, can be afraid to make the leap, but don't realize how much energy they're spending and not to their true self, to your point, right? And not able to go there. And there's others that can
Yeah.
do two at once, and that can feel safer. More power to them. Or they're the single provider for their family, and that can be a load that people carry around. Like, I can't do that. And I encourage folks to really think about that all the way through, because what message do you want to send to your kids? What example do you want to lead, even with the risk? I think you have to do smart on what's for you, but it's interesting. People will stay in things that are probably more risky to their health and long term than making the leap, making the decision. I noticed in your book you talk about, shifting gears a little bit, how to find that purpose. I'm guessing this isn't go live in India for 5 years on a mountaintop and become a monk. It's probably something more practical and tangible. What's your approach that you recommend folks to get more in touch with their purpose?
Well, Chris, first off, I would say that what I tried to concentrate on is not finding your purpose.
Okay.
I mean, I touch on it a little bit. What I tried to explain in this book, because I think it's less covered, is how do you live your purpose or live
Uh,
your passion?
got it.
Now, what I suggest, and I'll answer your question, is the first uh, chapter of my book that's on one of the principles. So it opens up with 7 chapters around mindset shifts. The first mindset shift that I go into is something that I call the mission angler. And
Mm,
for those who are listening, I picked angler on purpose because I was trying to create a metaphor for finding your purpose. And I picked it because I live here in Tampa Bay, where a lot of my friends are avid fishermen. And when I think about how they apply themselves to that art, it's not as if they get up in the morning on a Saturday, not thinking through their approach, get in the boat and just drive aimlessly to search for fish.
right.
Most of the ones I know, I mean, they're looking at this for days ahead of time. They're understanding what fish are in season, where there have been reports that there's good fishing areas. They're looking at the tides, the moon phases, bait, everything. But how many of us ourselves are that intentional about how we approach our life? Very few of
Mm,
us.
mm,
And so the exercise I really walk people through is we oftentimes find ourselves living in the gaps instead of the gains in life. And Benjamin Hardy wrote a great book on this called The Gap and the Gain. But when we're in the gaps, we're constantly trying to compare our progression in life to others,
mm.
as opposed to comparing ourselves to the person we were before. And in my case, an exercise that I went through that I think is very helpful to finding your purpose or your ideal self is what I call the bar stool exercise. So imagine you're sitting on top of a bar stool and it's got multiple supports underneath it. I want you to think about your life and how you're leading it today. In my
Mm.
case, I had multiple supports, but one of them, the constant grind, was weighing much, much heavier than the other supports were and how I was leading my life, causing me to have deficiencies in other areas that mattered.
Sure.
Now, the next step in the exercise is to kind of picture the future version of yourself and the supports that would make your life ideal. And everyone's going to have different support structures. For me, I thought they were my physical health, my mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, relationship health, etc. So my future version of myself, where I wanted to be, the purpose I wanted to have, which was, first of all, it was how do I bring those things into balance? And then how do I leverage what's unique about me to serve a problem in the world that needs to be solved?
Mm,
And this exercise isn't an easy one because
mm,
as you're going from that past version to your future version, you've got to find an initial area to work on. For me, it was really mental health PTSD that I had let perpetuate. I had let it just sit there ever since I had been in combat and hadn't really dealt with it. That was my starting point.
Mm.
But even more than that, it was really going through the work of identifying, what was an issue that I was really passionate about, because I think that's where your purpose then takes hold. And for me, it was really this feeling that I had of being just in utter despair when I had that numbness overcome me.
Mm.
And when I thought back upon it, at its core, what I really was impacted by the most was that feeling that I just didn't matter, and that I was working so hard to make other people's dreams and fortunes become true, but I wasn't really doing things that I felt were making a meaningful difference to others. And
Yeah.
so that's what Passion Struck became. It was my goal of how do I help others live a life of significance, and what are the best ways that I could use that, using the things that inherently are unique to me. And so that's an exercise, long description, but a way that I think someone could approach their purpose.
That's excellent. It's excellent. I love your stool analogy, and it really sounds like I've seen some people get concerned that their purpose, let's call it over a decade, might shift a little bit, right? At a time, your purpose is this, and it can be natural for it to shift to a degree, right? Some people keep the same thing their whole life, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, where there's just a natural shifting. You're anchored in what roots you on that virtual stool, but you see a different problem. Maybe you solve the problem or solve the 2 year thing and move forward. Do you see that in your work and as a leader that
Yeah,
people might shift?
no, it's an absolute common theme of all the. I have ended up studying 800 leaders now who I found exhibited passion struck qualities,
Nice.
but it's a common thing that is in all of them, this dimension of constant reinvention, which I think is going to be only needed more in the future. But
Mm.
if you look at someone like Dwayne the Rock Johnson, he's a person I profiled in the book, but let's just look at his case. I mean, how many times over his life has he reinvented himself, from initially a failed football player to breaking out into the WWE, to at first, while he was there, not having much success until he took on kind of the persona of The Rock,
Hmm.
and then making his push into acting, but then he's become a force for social good and
Right.
everything else that he's doing. So if you look at him, it's not as if the things he's doing haven't changed from the core of what he wanted to do, but he's expanded the way that he's making impact. And as he's becoming larger, he's found more outlets to do it. So it's a way that I don't necessarily think underlying his aims have changed, but the way he's going about achieving them has ultimately changed. But you could also go through different examples where I was having coffee with a friend of mine, and she was talking about the fact that she had just entered what she considered to be the third trimester of her life, kind of
Mm. Mm.
an interesting way to look at life. And she was saying, when I was in my first phase of my life, I was passionate about this. When I was in my second phase of life, I was really passionate about this. And now, as I'm in this third phase of life, I'm really trying to find that thing to anchor on for the remainder of my life. And I brought up Gary Vee as an example, and this just happened with him. So during that second phase of life, he was really concentrating on VaynerMedia, VaynerX, all the stuff that
Hmm.
he was doing to promote, marketing, social media, etc. He's now really focused on something that he calls V Friends, where he is trying to use animated cartoon characters, almost like Pokemon, to find a way that he can start teaching children important values that they need in life. And he says
Good.
this is what he wants to do with the rest of his life. Marty Seligman, the founder of positive psychology, has said that he's going to use the last phase of his life to focus on mattering, which I'm personally very excited about. But I think it could be either the Dwayne Rock Johnson or the Dwayne the Rock Johnson example or these other examples where it can shift depending on where you are in your life phases.
Yeah, 100%. And so well said. And I love the Gary Vee example too, because he's someone that I notice him doing multiple things and enjoying them all, right? You'll see him occasionally still go to garage sales and pay 20 bucks for the lemonade and teach people how to flip things, right? Even though he's doing all these, he's got mastery at different levels. And he's learned different things along the way to do it. So it's such a great example. I'm glad you brought him up, and The Rock too. Um, it's interesting too. When you're saying The Rock, I was reflecting too, similar path but different, like Schwarzenegger, right? He's initially was a muscle guy and then was a movie guy and certainly was a governor and now is, reaching out, being positive, teaching other people how to lift themselves up. So I agree with you. There's phases, and I guess the message here is it's okay that your purpose shifts as your life changes, and do what's right for you. I think
Well,
that's great.
yeah, well, I think a perfect example, since you brought up Schwarzenegger, I don't know why Matthew McConaughey popped in my head, but he
Yeah.
did. But you look at his recent book and now his partnership with Tony Robbins. I mean, he is now he's still doing the movie star thing, but
Mhm.
he has this ability now because of his popularity to influence people on a personal level. And he's certainly shifting more and more into that.
100%. Uh, Curious, you've been a leader, you've coached leaders, you've written this book, you've talked to over 700 leaders. Are there shifts or vacuums you're seeing in certain leadership styles, either corporate or non-corporate, where from your view we could step up, what it means to be a leader? Are you seeing like a deficiency in certain places in leadership?
So the answer to that is absolutely. Think it's important to give kind of a backdrop so the listeners can understand my history. So leadership has been something that has always fascinated me ever since I was a young kid. In fact, as soon as I could possibly figure out a way to do it, I put myself in the position where I had a paper out when I was in fifth grade, maybe even fourth grade. And then as soon as I was able to do it, I started working in grocery stores. And before I knew it, I was 15, 16 years old, uh, produce manager. Then I was running the truck crew. Then I was a manager in a distribution center. I just always was fascinated with leadership. And it's what led me to go to the Naval Academy because I thought, what better place could you go to learn leadership acumen than one of the service academies?
Right.
I was very ingrained in service leadership coming out of the academy. And I think that served me extremely well for about 20 years of my career. I started to realize that there was a shift as we were outsourcing more and more jobs. And I think that shift has become more profound now as we are now looking at more and more people who are working hybrid models where we find people working more remote than they are in the office. And
Mm,
I think when you go into that model, the part of the cornerstone to me about being a servant leader was being present with the people you're leading. And I think it's more difficult to do that in this more hybrid work approach that we're finding ourselves in. So I have
yeah.
defined a new leadership style that I think is needed, which I call the gardener leader,
Mm,
where similar to the way a gardener nurtures their crops, where they can't be hands on all the time, but they need to be eyes on. It's the same way I think we need to act as leaders. So it's eyes on, hands off leadership. And for this chapter, I ended up interviewing two people I hold in highest regard. One of them was General Stan McChrystal, and the other was Keith Crotch, who is the former Assistant Secretary of State under Pompeo.
mm,
And when I was talking to both of them, I'll use the military example of McChrystal. It's not as if when he was in charge of all troops in Afghanistan that he could sit there as he had a ranger team up in the mountains 500 miles away from him performing an operation where he could micromanage everything they're doing. If you use this philosophy, he had to be eyes on in the aspect of making sure that those troops understood the mission that they were supposed to perform, what the outcome was supposed to be, that they had the proper training, that they were getting the support that they needed. But where the hands off comes into play is once you give all that training and oversight, you need to give those people the creativity and innovation to do the job the way they need to do it, because they have operational oversight that he's not going to have 500 miles away or however far away he was. In a similar way, you could look at a software developer in a corporation. I mean, how many times do we micromanage the output, not only of developers, but of all the people who are under us?
Right.
Whereas if you gave a software developer key parameters on what the outcome is of the project you have them working on, keys to understanding it, the tools to have the inputs that they need, if you're not allowing them to be hands off and acting like that gardener, you're really inhibiting their ability to express individual creativity and innovation and how they're getting their job done. So I am really advocating that we start shifting the focus towards being more gardener leaders in our approach and lessen the servant leadership that brought me success at one point, but I don't think is as effective going forward.
Yep, fully agree. It's a great term, gardener leadership. And there's so many studies that talk about the brain science around this, right? When we set people up for a win, we're now leveraging all of their brains instead of all the load being on us as a leader, right? And let them come up with their own solutions and problem solve within the parameters, if you so eloquently said. Everyone wins, right? There's a better solution, there's a stronger solution. The leader's not as stressed out. It's not all on your shoulders. So it's just such a great example.
Yeah, and can I just give just quickly a couple examples of the difference, because people still might not be understanding it. So
absolutely.
So let's just talk about the approach to empowerment between the two. So in a Gardner leadership style, the leader empowers the team members by giving them autonomy and encouraging them to take ownership of their work. It's about strategically stepping back to let others lead and grow. In a servant leader, empowerment comes through support and service. The leader is more hands-on in addressing team members' needs, often direct involvement. Now let's look at maybe short and long-term orientation. Gardner leader focuses on long-term growth and sustainability. Servant leadership, while not short-sighted, is more oriented towards addressing current needs and challenges, sometimes at the cost of long-term planning.
Right.
So those are just two ways you can see the difference that might give the audience a better way to think about this.
No, thank you for that. That's great. And it's subtle but important. John, I'm just curious. I know you've got a phenomenal podcast, a phenomenal book. For our listeners that want to engage with you more, and if you're on the treadmill and driving, please don't hurt yourself. This will be in the show notes. You'll see it. But how can folks find you and engage with you and learn more from you?
So I'm lucky that that both my name and Passion Struck are easy to find in Google. So if you want to find me individually, it's John with the middle initial R Miles. And if you want to learn more about the podcast, the book, everything else that we're doing from a business standpoint, then it would be passionstruck.com.
Awesome. Thanks so much, John. Well, before we wrap up, I love to ask all my guests, what's one thing that you're thankful or grateful for right now?
So I just went through a pretty difficult couple of months, and it was difficult because I have a younger sister who came down with pancreatic cancer and unfortunately passed away. And so it's been difficult from the standpoint of seeing her leave this world. I think what gives me hope is she was really an advocate for peace and unity through love and kindness. And what I'm hopeful for is we have so much divisiveness in our world today, not just in the US, which we've seen even last week with the potential assassination attempt, but there's everywhere you look, whether it's in the Middle East or Europe or Africa or Asia, we've got this divisiveness. And I am really hopeful that perhaps we can orientate ourselves more around love and kindness to each other, to focus on things that bring us commonality rather than divisiveness, because we all need to be working on things that are for the collective good, like solving climate change, like solving income inequality, like solving the healthcare issues and water shortages and other things that are impacting millions of people globally, rather than putting our politics over the welfare of people. And to me, really what this comes down to is making a meaningful difference in other people's lives and having more people make that their core focus, which is what I'm really trying to promote with everything I'm doing on Passion Struck.
Wow, so well said, John, and so sorry for your loss, and to your family as well. And that, thank you so much for being a guest with us today, listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in to this awesome session. Be sure to like and subscribe and do all those magical things so you won't miss anything else. And encourage you to, as John so eloquently said, lead from the heart and look to be a person of service and be a gardener leader too. Take care and keep leading the way. Thank you for listening to Leading the Way podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe so you won't miss other great episodes like this one. And if you're ready for more in your workplace, be sure to go to aintent.com. You'll find lots of free tools, assessments, and ways to engage directly with us to get your own epic results. We'll see you there.